Hey, everybody. Welcome to the PuriFi Pros podcast. I'm here in the studio with Michael Hunter.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome. And today we're going to be talking about back to school, potentially back to germs, right? You've had some children in your life, right? How many do you have?
5.
5? I have 4.
Yeah.
And kids, as much as you love them, what's it like when they're in elementary school or high school in terms of germs around the house?
Man, it's like they're a magnet. Not only they just collect it all, but they just bring it all back.
Yeah.
They bring it all back, and so sharing is caring is what I hear, but I don't buy that.
Like a walking petri dish
of
junk that they pick up along the way. And, again, love them, but there's not a lot of boundaries, especially when they're small.
No.
Maybe you have too many boundaries when they get older. They like don't even want to be around you. But when they're small, which is kind of where I'm at right now, I think we've got 3 to 13 or the age ranges. They are in your space, and as much as you love that, every once in a while you're like, what am I breathing right now? like what is emanating from this child, and what does that mean for me for the next few days, weeks, or who knows how long. But then also it's not just what they bring home, it's also what they share at school together, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, things that you tell them at home, do not touch that. That's gross, nasty.
Right.
That's like
it's a dare.
Yeah, gloves are off it.
Right.
Like, hey, I get to do whatever I want.
Footloose and fancy free.
Yeah.
It's like 30 on 1 with the teacher, right? There's no way that they can tell you no enough. Yeah. And so any chance they have, they'll be doing whatever they're not supposed to do. But there are some opportunities to for parents, like us or like other people, to at least get more informed, if not take more action around what's happening at those schools. And there's certainly been a lot of that over the past couple years.
Oh, for sure.
Air quality, surface hygiene, general hygiene, all of that has been in the limelight. But, somebody still needs to ask the questions to make sure that the right things continue to be done, or in some cases get done in the first place.
Yeah. People want a silver bullet to, just stop all the germs from happening. What we're talking about today is, how do you get that extra layer of protection wherever you can get it?
Yeah.
And how do you know you're getting it? That's kind of what we're after, really.
Yeah, and all joking aside, there's real impact from it. You think about the children miss school, or the children get behind, or then the other kids in the house get something, and then the parents get something, and the economic impact on society is significant. The cost of missed days of work, the cost of missed school, and the revenue that means, or the funding, I should say, that means to the school. And then, of course, all the health impacts. It does matter, so all joking aside. But what we want to talk about today is, what can a parent do, realistically? And I think probably number one is be informed so that you can inform your school about what you know and care about.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to a gentleman who was trying to get something done in a school district, and during the last couple of years, that school district had already done something to try to add that extra layer of protection. So that everybody felt safe coming back. And during that conversation with the board of the school district, very large school district, if I said it, everybody would be amazed. But I probably shouldn't name the name.
Good idea.
But they'd be amazed that, the school district said, we just spent millions of dollars of the taxpayers' money, and we don't know that it's actually having an effect. And that was scary to hear that. I'm like, you probably don't want to share that with the taxpayers.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But at some point, they said, you know what, it's probably more important that we know health-wise what's going on, because we do want to do the right thing. We spend money all the time, and we re-spend money to do something better. And so that's what they were after. And so, when we talk about going to school, what did that school district find out that they didn't know before? And we're going to talk about that today. What should you know about what are we measuring in there?
Yeah.
And how do we know that impact?
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is the difference between hygiene theater and hygiene impact.
Yeah.
The impact is something that should be able to be measured. And again, something that we talk about a lot. we do it in business. We do it in personal goals. We do it in our personal lives. We measure so that we can know if we've made progress. You find out where you are. You find out if you made progress, did things get better or worse, and then you take next actions accordingly. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people in that boat today where funding was given or funding was, set aside from a business, or, we're talking about schools today, or set aside from a private school, or something like that. And they're looking back now 2 years later and saying, what did we get? That's the question in their minds.
Absolutely. Yes. In some of the scenarios, the companies that provided the product are now being asked to either take it out or re-engineer how it's installed. And that affects everybody. It affects, obviously, that company. It affects the people in business. But at the end of the day, what everybody's promised is they're trying to get that understanding that, yeah, I'm in an environment that is better than it would be without that. And that hope that you talk about, hope is not a plan. I hope it works.
Right.
Yeah, it's like roll the dice, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, exactly. And today, I think what we'll talk about is what are some things that have been suggested, so people can at least be aware of that if they're not already. And then, what are the things that they can do to see if it actually worked? Yeah. And I think those are big differences. And some of the things that have been talked about, there are really two, maybe three things that have been the most proliferated around social media or from bureaus or, the news. And that is air filters, air change rates, and outside air.
Right.
And so, if we talk about those three things, air filters, we have a separate episode on air filters, so we won't cover a ton on air filters today. But what do you typically see, let's say pre-pandemic? Pre-pandemic, what would you have typically seen from an air filter in a school?
Something that's probably the lowest rating, maybe 1 or 2 inch filter standard, and it was there ultimately to protect that piece of equipment and the energy costs, because they're acutely aware of energy being used by the buildings that they're in. And that was really what they were after, is protecting those things.
Yeah. Those are significant capital investments in the HVAC system, and then significant expenses in the form of energy. That those schools are trying to manage budgets, and we always want more for our children. But then they say, well, but we're spending all this money on energy. How do we mitigate that? And oftentimes, pre-pandemic, let's say, you would end up with a fiberglass air filter. That is an industry term, for people, so they know. Or a very low-rated MERV filter, which we've talked about before. Industry term, you can look up online. There's a nice little table of MERV ratings, and what they mean. A lot of times you'd see a MERV 6, 7, 8, in those school air conditioning systems, because they were trying to minimize energy costs and protect the equipment. That might not necessarily do a whole heck of a lot for the people inside.
Right. Yeah, and then the jump was made during the last 2 years.
Yep.
Yeah, they came out and said, you know what, let's get better filtration so we're catching as much as we can. And they threw all the other concerns aside.
Right.
And said, you know what, caution to the wind on energy costs, caution to the wind on the equipment, and what we're going to do there. Let's protect the people inside the building. There's a balance there.
Yeah.
And you may have helped possibly some air coming in, things captured, but what you did was you just burn that energy bill and said, we're just going to light it up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you think about the whole life cycle of that. If we think about, where does pollution come from? Now, some of it is ambient. Some of it we create as humans. And then what happens is it comes in, infiltrates. It's called infiltration. It infiltrates the building. It accumulates inside of that building. And then we just breathe it in through our bodies for whatever doesn't make it up to that filter. And so if I'm going to burn more energy, I'm also creating more pollution outdoors to create that energy, which eventually makes it back into my building and then right back inside. So everything is connected. I think it's important for people to understand that, especially as they advocate for a certain solution. You want clean air for your children. You want to minimize risk for teachers and children and employees. but you also don't want to burn your budget to the ground so that those children are shortchanged or the teachers have less resources in other areas.
Absolutely. Yeah. Next subject was the bringing fresh air in, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, or outside air.
Outside air.
We don't know if it's fresh.
Yeah, there you go. That was the term they used, like, we need fresh air.
Yes.
And that's a misnomer.
Yeah.
Right?
Can be.
Can be. Yeah, then if we bring in that outside air, then we're going to dilute it. Right? It's diluting all the things that are inside because that was the belief. Second to bringing in outside air is you're driving down the road in your car and all of a sudden you see a big truck and see the smokestack come up, and your natural inclination is like, put it on recirculate so it can't get into my car, so
right.
I don't have to breathe it. Right?
Yep.
Everybody sees that, but when you've got ventilation going into a building, you don't have that luxury of knowing what's going on outside to affect it inside.
True.
It's just whatever's out there is coming in.
Agreed. Yeah, and there's a big difference between being on the 20th floor of a commercial building and being on the ground floor near school buses lining up, too. Because a lot of times what we see in the data, again, measure your air quality, look at the numbers. On the 20th floor of a building, you're above a lot of the pollution and junk that's floating around. So when you bring in outside air, that could be a much different equation than when I'm sitting ground level at a school with 20 school buses lined up. And in the mornings, I'm sucking all that in, potentially, let's say, of outside air into my building. I'm adding particles, I'm adding pollutants, I'm adding emissions into that occupied space. And if I'm never measuring it, then how do I ever know?
Yeah. Just so everybody knows, we're not advocating don't bring in outside air. We're not advocating, don't change your filters. What we're advocating is education on this thing, because having been around all these applications, in the right application, those things are great. Right. As long as you can control the outcome.
Yes. Control it, measure it, prove it, then you're good. And I think I've said that, we've discussed this before. It's all about outcomes for occupants.
Yeah.
And I think that's what this subject of going back to school comes back to. Think about the occupants who are in those schools. The teachers who have been on the front lines, all the school staff to keep our schools open during what we've been through, over the past couple of years. And now moving forward, as we've learned from those experiences, how do we keep people safer? How do we make the air and the services cleaner? Then also the children. And I think, on that subject, yes, we want to protect them from the germs and getting sick and all that stuff. Absolutely. But the particles and the pollution in the air affects how those children learn. If somebody listening right now goes online and searches air quality and children's test scores, you will find a slew of data points that talk about how the cleaner the air, the better the test scores. You pick your reference. I'm not going to provide the exact reference, but plenty of them in there. So it's hugely important, but people need to know, they need to have a sense of how does it all really work and what can I really ask for, or what should I be looking for? So I come back to those suggestions earlier. We talked about air filters. MERV 8, well, let's just throw in a MERV 13. Yeah, but, let's measure, let's watch. And then the subject of outside air, we covered that. Measure. If outside air is good and it will actually dilute the indoor environment, then maybe that can help. But also you got to watch the airflow inside of that space. And then the air change rates. So talk about air change rates in terms of recirculation and air movement.
Yeah, so what happens in a normal building, usually there's between about 6 and 8 times an hour where that air goes out of the building and new air enters it. So it's just doors are open, windows are open, cracks in the building, just, ventilation, just the way it's all set up. There's usually between 6 and 8 times that air changes. So it's not you enter the building and...
Or that's what you want, right?
Yeah, that's what you want.
That's what you want.
That's what you want. That's the ideal. But you don't know if that's actually always happening.
Right.
Are you getting that many air changes, or are you just sitting in the same air? Or is the air that you're conditioning moving faster than that? Generally lower.
Yeah.
Generally lower. I'm going to go back to something you said earlier about, test scores in kids. If we relate it to even as adults, if we've got an allergies or, we're just, we ate something the night before, what is our production like as an adult?
That's true.
How we feel really, really matters. Air quality is a big part of that. And we spend billions of dollars on symptoms, right? For ourselves, for our children, for our pets even.
Yeah.
Hey, what are these different things, allergies, asthma, all these things that happen. And we're just trying to control what we can control here. But those test scores, that's a very real thing.
Yeah.
Of, we want cognitively for kids to do their best. If we don't pay attention to the air, you would never send your kid to school knowing that the water quality was really bad, and say, you know what, just drink out of the fountain.
Right.
You'll be fine. No, people are going to send their kids with bottled water.
Right.
Right. Because don't trust what's going on there. Let's talk about the measuring. How do people even measure and know what's going on?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one of the biggest triggers for kids in school, or asthma triggers or allergy triggers, or the transmission of viruses and bacteria through the air are the particles. And the particles, unfortunately, we can't see them with our human eye. When you can see them when the light's shining through the window, those are maybe 10 micron in size, and that's the smallest that 20/20 vision can see. So you need a device. You need something that can actually measure it. And they're called particle counters. And, we advocate for things like laser particle counters. We just advocate for people to get one that measures accurately. Usually in the literature or in the advertisement, there should be some accuracy measurement. And you want something that's at least 98% accurate. And you want that to be measured inside of the school. What's our air quality level? And usually what it will measure are at least two main measurements. One is PM 2.5. We'll talk about what that means. And PM 10, and you can get that on your weather app. That's important for people to know. You go on your weather app and you look it up, and you scroll down to the bottom of the weather app, and it will tell you what your air quality index is. Well, that's made up from other numbers. PM 2.5, which we'll explain, PM 10, and those get rolled up into an air quality index. Right now, where we sit in the valley, it's 58. Now, in our office, that air quality index, our indoor air quality index, is 0.
So it says it's moderate probably on there, because over 50 is moderate.
Correct.
Under 50 is good. But our office is 0. So if 50 is good, 0 must be amazing.
Much better. Right, much better. And it will also tell you what the primary pollutant is. And so I think if people look at their weather app, what's outdoors? What is the EPA? What are all these measurements measuring outdoors, and say, we should be figuring out what these are indoors. The primary pollutant today outside is PM 2.5. And that means particles that are 10 times, maybe 30 times smaller, maybe 50 times smaller than what our eyes can see. And they're floating around the air, and those are the ones that get past our nose into our lungs, causing some of the issues that we talked about today in transmitting things.
I think it even tells you there sometimes, like, hey, with PM 2.5 or 10, it'll tell you what's causing that and what it does to you.
Yeah, it does. And it'll link out, if you're on Apple, it'll link out to Breezometer, which is, one of the measurements. But PM 2.5 and primary pollutants are pollen and smoke and some other things today. And then PM 10 is at 55 micrograms per meter cubed, which is technical jargon. But what's really nice is when you look at this kind of data, it gives you green, yellow, red, purple. So it just says, what's okay. Doesn't mean it's perfect, because you can always get better. That's important. But it does give you some color codes. And that's what we encourage people to look for in the schools. We can do all the things we want in an air conditioning system. MERV 13, outdoor air, in-room air purifiers, duct-mounted devices. But if the air quality doesn't get better and can't be measured like we do on the apps on our phone, what have we really accomplished?
Absolutely. Yeah, and in that same take, you've got the kids in there, and I always describe particles because, like, particles, those are the things that are floating around, and what are attached to those particles? Those are the viruses, the things. And so if we can just get that out of the airspace, then the vehicle, the particle floating around, we just drop it out or get it out of this space. Then we create that air quality index, like you said, in our office is 0. We create a space where now that's an extra layer of protection. Now, Susie and Johnny, because, they're licking the doorknob and that's gross stuff, you can't prevent that. That's not what we're after here.
Yeah, exactly.
But we are just trying to clear the air.
Yeah. Exactly. And remove that highway.
Yeah.
That transmission highway that is particles and junk in the air. Get as much of that out of the air as we can. And it starts with a measurement. And so you can get a device. You can get it from PuriFi Labs if you want to, or you can find one online. Just make sure that it has really strong accuracy. So it's measuring 98% accurate or more. And measure PM 2.5, measure PM 10. Get an indoor air quality index going inside of your children's classroom. That will give you a baseline and say, hey, is it working? Is it not working? And when? Because that's the other thing is conditions can change.
Yeah.
And unless you have a monitor tracking it, you won't know. And then you could be breathing in who knows what. We've talked about that with other stories, whether it's a wildfire hundreds of miles away, or it's your neighbor or somebody smoking and it comes into the building, or pinhole leaks in the ductwork. You just don't know unless you're measuring. And then once you measure, you can advocate for it to get better.
It's curious. I was looking online, and I've sent some of these to you as well. Like, hey, look at this sensor. It says it reads this and that. But the accuracy thing is a big thing because it can still measure PM 2.5, but at what accuracy rate?
Right.
How consistent is that? Is it, we measure 2.5 every 2 hours, every hour,
right?
Or is it every 90 seconds?
Right. Frequency,
and how often, so that we can actually affect it. That's amazing because there's a lot of that out there.
Yeah, if you've got something measuring the problematic particle range, PM 2.5, and it's 50% accurate at reading that, well, that's wild. That's like a coin toss. 50-50 chance you're going to get it right. You want something that's much more accurate than that, and then you can measure progress from there.
One of the things that comes up is people talk about, well, how can I affect the school board? How can I affect this? It's like I'm just one little voice. What can I do? And it feels overwhelming a little bit. But having been armed with the right questions, the right information that's helpful. One of the things that's really important, and we can talk probably about this, is what can you control? And maybe not the school board immediately, but you can control what happens in your house. And so are you asking the same questions about how am I protecting my castle, my little part of the world? Because then you have some way to measure and see what's going on in your own house. And then you can speak to maybe the school board, the teachers, the principal about, hey, there's a technology out there, or there's a measuring device that we know. Can we do the same thing? Yeah,
that's a really good point. And the more you get involved and educate around how your house works, it's important for people to realize the schoolroom, the classroom doesn't operate much different. The HVAC system is very similar. The air filter styles are very similar. So the more you take control over your home and get engaged with managing the air quality in my own home, measuring things, taking action to make it better, the easier it is to advocate with, experience behind you to those school boards.
Absolutely. And so when they do come back from that environment, that is what we see is the collection point where they're all this amoeba just carrying this thing around.
Right.
At least when they get home, we've got a defense mechanism for that.
Agreed. Yeah, and the other thing is, I don't know if you found this with your children, but sometimes they're brutally honest.
Too much so, yeah.
But if you're talking about it in your home, if they're seeing devices, about, hey, here's what we're trying to do to make things better, they will also be little advocates for you, at school as well with their teachers and everybody else. And I'm sure that the frontline workers, the teachers and the school workers, they're going to appreciate it as well because, they're there every day with those 30 kids in that classroom, which is, it's a miracle. Bless them. Yes, absolutely. Bless them. Grateful for them. But, we can advocate on their behalf, perhaps in a way that they can't. Take care of our homes, get educated, get measuring, take action, and have our children be little advocates too. And then with the experience from our homes, we can go advocate and say, hey, let's take a look at what's going on here. What air filters do we have? What air change rates do we have? What devices do we have installed? What have we measured? Yeah. And then that's how you end up with an opportunity to make it better.
Well, I have a right to know we're paying our taxes for the education. We're paying our taxes for the protection of the people that are working there and our children, and we're all in that together.
Yeah, absolutely. To that point, PuriFi's here with everybody together as well. So if you have questions, reach out to us. You can go to our website, purifilabs.com, and submit questions. You can also call us. We're happy to help and support, and make sure that you're armed with the right questions and information, and find the right technologies to measure, like we talked about, and make the air quality better for all of us.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, very good. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Jerry.
We'll see you next time.